Welcome to the Lost Debate, a show for political eclectics. I'm Ravi Gupta, and I'm jumping on because Politico just reported allegations of rape against Democratic Senate candidate Graham Platner. And if you've been listening to this podcast, you know I've been concerned about this guy. Interviewed him a while ago, and immediately after that interview, was very clear that I felt like he lied to me in that interview about his tattoo in that instance. Uh, and then I started talking here and elsewhere about all the other things in his background that made me very concerned. And there was a combination of very concerning things in his background with very poor and inconsistent explanations for those things, combined with incoherent policy views as well. So saying like, even if one did think that all these things in his background were, something you could look past in service of what? Like, what is he saying? He had this kind of bumper sticker campaigning. And then when I asked him about things like education or AI, his answers didn't make any sense to me. And so here we are. He appears to be very likely to drop out, which means that the Democratic Party in Maine will be able to choose his successor. I imagine, given the state of the party, things are going to be really gnarly there. It's going to be a bit of a mess. And who is there to blame for this? Well, number one, Graham Platner. Obviously, his behavior is his responsibility first and foremost. And then it starts to get interesting, right? Who else can we blame here? Who brought us Graham Platner? And I wrote about this in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago, but I think there is a new establishment within the Democratic Party. It includes prominent podcasters, YouTubers, but also operatives at places like the Fight Agency, and they work together. So they largely sing from the same song sheet. They talk to the same people. They endorse the same candidates. And they prefer a certain kind of brand of candidates, right? And these are often very messy candidates with thin resumes, very little to say about policy except sort of bumper sticker slogans about either Middle East politics or socialism and about much else. And even if you agreed with those bumper sticker slogans, often these candidates come with a heavy price tag. And in the case of Graham Platner, that price tag is a incredibly discouraging series of revelations and a very troubled background. And so what do we do with this new establishment? Well, I argued in the Wall Street Journal that when these types of things go on, like when these candidates fail, the new establishment is going to duck and cover and try to avoid any accountability for this. So I'm watching for that now. And it's too early to say what exactly they're going to say. We'll probably get some meek mea culpas and they'll move on and they'll try to be like, okay, let's move on to places like Michigan and listen to us about who our candidate is, right? And I think it's important to stop and say, no, like, I'm not listening to your podcast anymore. I'm not watching your YouTube anymore. I'm not supporting your candidates anymore. This is largely a group of people who spent their entire lives in politics and media and don't know how to take the measure of a person. They also don't have a lot of life experience, right? So they don't know a lot about the material world. And so the reason why they don't, for instance, have anything to say about education is because they haven't spent a lot of time out there amongst people who are struggling. And so I think they exhibit it. And I've been very hard on these guys, the Pod Save America guys. Save probably Dan Pfeiffer, who I think has probably deviated from the rest of the guys on that network. But by and large, those guys were very early in supporting Platner. Some of them, like John Favreau, were incredibly dismissive of anybody who was critical of Graham Platner. For instance, on May 27th, he tweeted a poll that had Platner up by 9 points and said, sure, but just wait until people hear about that tattoo he covered up. So he was mocking people who were concerned about a Nazi tattoo. And then he tweeted as well. He says, Graham Platner isn't just our best and only chance to beat Susan Collins. He's a good and decent man who struggled and grown and is always trying to do better. I hope everyone with reservations takes a little time to get to know the real life version of him, not what the algorithm throws in our faces. Notice how it's like the real life version of him versus the algorithms, where it's actually obviously the other way around, right? Like these super online people, I don't know if they're the victims and the perpetrators of these algorithms, but one of the reasons why so many people are misinformed about people like Graham Platner is because the giant, huge podcasters and YouTubers out there are glossing these candidates and trying to hide from a very troubled record, or in some cases excusing it, right? And he's obviously not the only one on that network. You have people like Ben Rhodes, who I've collaborated with before. He tweeted on May 21st a video of Platner saying, "Meanwhile, there are people ready to remake the Democratic Party to actually meet the moment." Right. So all these guys, and Rhodes was way early supporting Graham Platner. These folks get really defensive when you criticize them about this. I've collaborated with them on the Obama campaign. I did a podcast investigating a political murder in India with Crooked Media, and Ben was the executive producer of that. Super grateful for that experience, but that doesn't buy you immunity from criticism. And so I went on Twitter, which I don't do very often today when all this news broke, and I, brought those receipts, and I was critical of the guys at Pod Save America and pretty pointed about it, saying, look, like you need to be held accountable for this. It's something I also put in the Wall Street Journal a couple weeks ago, and I've been pretty clear on this podcast about. And immediately I start getting text messages from a common friend who is very close friends with those guys. And these tweets are super barbed, attacking my character, accusing me of trying to build audience after over criticizing them. And I think you'd find that laughable as Lost Debate listeners. How many K to 12 episodes am I doing, or episodes about the fiscal crisis or the New York City budget? If I was trying to juice the algorithms and go after audience, I'm doing a terrible job with it. But who cares, right? It's like, what's going on here is whether those guys encouraged this guy to reach out to me or not. And he was attacking my character. He was saying I was ungrateful. He said that they made me, the Pod Save America guys, which I was like, what are you talking about? I did one podcast with those guys where I paid them to help produce the podcast. I paid them a lot of money, like $500,000, too much, honestly. And I never reached out to them again. This guy's like, you were trying to do more projects with them. I literally never texted them, emailed them, contacted them after we did that podcast. Never tried to work together with them again, didn't want to work together with them again. And I've largely not talked about the execution of that project because I didn't think it was professional, right? I had a certain experience with them on that. I think it could have been better, but I was like, we just move on, right? I'm not going to criticize you publicly for that because that's business, right? We did it. We put the pod out out of respect for everybody who worked on it. I've always been quiet about that experience. But now maybe they're sending somebody to try to intimidate me. Maybe he's doing it on his own. But it seems like some establishment behavior here where they're getting their back up because they're criticized. And here's the thing. You can't claim that you're anti-establishment and act like this. You are the establishment. And when you tweet things like, which Favreau has done, like, why don't you call me, to people who criticize him, call me and we could talk about X privately, whether it's the Hassan Piker thing or whatever, instead of having a public debate. Well, that's establishment behavior, right? Which is also what happened when those guys saw Biden at a fundraiser uh, and later admitted that they were super alarmed by Biden's cognitive state, but only until the debate did they publicly call for Biden to step down. So they kept all that information private. It's like, why have a podcast? Why have this big media company if you're going to shield from your audience very important truths, right? And so my point here with Platner is this is a symptom of a bunch of people who are dangerously out of touch and who are going to do a lot of damage to the Democratic Party and this country, and who, regardless of how many elections you lose to Trump, you really have lost when you've completely lost your soul. And I think in picking candidates like Graham Platner and excusing his behavior every step of the way, or inviting on and glossing people like Hassan Piker, who does everything possible that is anathema to the Obama ethos. When you start doing stuff like that, that's when Trump has won. It's not when he's won these elections. It's when you yourself have changed so much that you don't even notice it anymore. Like, you have become the kind of person who excuses horrible behavior, who excuses a Nazi tattoo, who excuses thin records of service and language that's derogatory to everybody from women to people in the military. You're excusing candidates with platitudinal, super thin policy ideas, people who have inconsistent explanations for their own backgrounds. Never mind, Hassan Piker, I've talked about at length here, people who call anybody a name who disagrees with you, who pick candidates who seem to almost consistently say things like America deserved 9/11, right? Trump wins not when he beats you at the ballot box, but when you run into the arms of people like that. People like Hassan Piker, people like Graham Platner. And I've got to say, I've been, I generally speaking have done a few podcasts on this kind of stuff, but I generally like to go back to our bread and butter here, which is K-12 education, long-term trends in dating and attention and things like that. But honestly, days like today just got me pissed. And like, if you're going to try to come after me for just pointing out something that's obvious to anybody with eyes and ears, no matter what your politics are, and you try to intimidate people from speaking their minds, then you're going to be damn sure I'm going to speak more about this, whether it's here or on Majority 54, and I'm going to be barbed about it. Not because of audience, but because it's the right thing to do. And honestly, because I'm genuinely pissed now, right? It's one thing to be wrong. It's one thing to mock people who are pointing out something that's super obvious about the flawed candidates you're supporting. And then it's a whole other thing to text me to try to intimidate me from speaking my mind to our audience here at the Lost Debate or anywhere else. Like, as if you don't have a right, listener, to know what I am thinking about all of these people, right? You tune in because you want me to be honest, regardless if it costs me some future collaboration or not, right? That's why you come here. And so, yeah, I'm pissed. I'm pissed because of what they did. I'm pissed that they're trying to intimidate people like me from speaking up. I'm pissed that they've erected this Potemkin establishment, the DNC, the DCCC, the Third Way, all these irrelevant organizations. Meanwhile, they're the kingmakers within the party, and they're trying to deflect any criticism and accountability. And they're doing it from mansions on the coasts, living a very privileged life, while you, listener, are out there just trying to make heads or tails out there. You just want competent people in office who are good people. Maybe not even good, maybe just like average people, like somebody who didn't rape somebody. Maybe somebody who doesn't have a Nazi tattoo. Maybe somebody who might be flawed and they've done certain things, and maybe they have a few things to explain, right? Maybe they have a DUI. Maybe they, cheated on their spouse, whatever, right? But they're like, they have an explanation for how they changed. They have something lucid to say about the future of America. They can show some backbone on issues that matter, right? You're just searching for some sanity in this world. And that's why this podcast exists. This is why I drag myself onto this thing day after day, week after week, despite like you sometimes wanting to hide from the news, because it doesn't make me feel good. I don't like to wake up on days like today and see somebody who I just had a conversation with not long ago who gave me the heebie-jeebies. I don't want to get the heebie-jeebies when I talk to these people, right? Just like you want to hear from somebody that you can believe in, right? Like my mom called me after the Planner interview and she was like, "Oh, this guy seems like he could be, very interesting." And I just, it bummed me out because I had to be like, "No, I actually think that there's some problems here." And actually, in talking to my mom, I realized that I had to go back on the pod, both this one and Majority 54, and be honest about my feelings, because I felt like it was a very short interview. It was like 15 minutes and I was tag teaming. And I was like, I need to come back on next week and immediately say what I think about this guy, because that's what I owe my audience. Even though on that podcast, it's a very progressive audience who hates it when I say stuff like that. Right. So here we are. I obviously signing up for this crusade against this new establishment. I think that's very clear. And you'll hear more from me here or on Instagram or on the Majority 54 podcast about this, depending on, what I can say or not say. And I'll be honest about it. They'll attack me. They'll come after me. Maybe they'll attack my character. I have no idea. Maybe I'm too small. Maybe they don't care at all. But either way, it's time to be honest about this stuff. It's long past time to be honest about these destructive forces. We'll keep talking about this. And I'm going to write something in the next few days about, well, I'm against all this stuff. Well, what am I for, right? A lot of you listen to podcasts have a pretty strong sense of that, but I'll put it together in a more digestible package. So if you're listening to this, you could subscribe and watch this on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe if you haven't yet. You can go back to our pods to the Lost Debate podcast and subscribe there. This reminds me of the days when Biden was dropping out and just jumping on without a prepared script. So thanks for hearing my rants. Send me some messages. I could start answering listener and viewer questions as well as we go through this, because I know you've got a lot of them. Have a great week, everybody.